Are mushrooms gluten-free?
Well, it's complicated. Today I'm trying to answer a question that has been plaguing me for years. Are gourmet cultivated mushrooms actually gluten-free?
Oh, that's a fascinating question.
This question has taken me months and a lot of gas money to try and answer. But I think I finally did it. Okay, let me explain. You see, I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disorder where I can't digest gluten. Also, I grow mushrooms as a hobby, hence the mushroom laboratory around me. But the more I learned about growing mushrooms in my own practice, the more I learned that gluten is at the core of nearly every commercial recipe. Most growers use wheat or rye berries in their grain spawn, malt extract in their agar, and supplement their final substrates with wheat bran. Just to clarify, gluten is found in wheat, barley, rye, and malt. Now, if these were plants, it wouldn't matter much what's in the substrate. But mushrooms have this amazing trait that makes me skeptical of their gluten-free status. Mushrooms can suck up components of their substrates into their final fruiting bodies. This is why it's a bad idea to go pick mushrooms in cities that spray a lot of pesticides and fertilizers. The risk isn't just if you pick a mushroom that's been sprayed directly. There's also a risk that the mushrooms have sucked up harmful chemicals through their mycelium and into their final fruiting bodies. This ability makes mushrooms a fantastic candidate for different environmental restoration projects because they can go in and suck up harmful pollutants in the environment. That is a really cool area of research, but it is not what we're talking about today. So of course mushrooms are inherently gluten-free. But I guess my core question is this. If mushrooms are well documented to soak up compounds in their substrates, and gluten is at the core of nearly every commercial substrate, then how much gluten, if any, is getting sucked up into the final mushrooms? And if the answer is 0, then how much gluten, if any, is contaminating these mushrooms before they go on to final sale? I have to say, most times that I eat grocery store mushrooms, I end up feeling a little bit sick afterwards, like I got cross-contaminated by gluten. This doesn't happen every time, but it's enough that I've noticed. As a gluten-free mushroom enthusiast, I think I owe it to the gluten-free community at large to get to the bottom of this. To get to the bottom of this seemingly bottomless hole of uncertainty, I knew I needed outside help. So first, I called up gluten itself and punched it really hard. Yeah. Now that my mortal enemy has been subdued for the day, I can actually get to work. So secondly, I contacted an expert in this area of research. And then I contacted another. And then I contacted another. And it seems like this is actually quite a difficult question to get anybody to speak on. Well, luckily, someone did agree to help me out. So today I'm heading to Athabasca University to get an answer to the first part of my question. So right now, I'm heading to meet a local legendary mycologist named Dr. Roland Trow. Every time I mention to anyone around these parts that I'm into mushrooms, they say, "Oh, do you know Dr. Roland?" So I'm stoked to have an excuse to actually go meet the man himself. This is so cool.
I'm Roland Troy, and I've been studying mushrooms for my whole life. My parents would collect mushrooms and we would go out in the forest. I became fascinated with the ones that I didn't know. And there were some huge mushrooms and I was so small, and that fascination just stayed with me.
So what did you first think when I contacted you with my question? Why did you want to help me out?
My first thought was, oh, that's a fascinating question that I never pondered myself. But knowing how much issues people have with gluten, I thought, well, it's an obvious question. First of all, we have to look at what gluten is. Gluten is a series of complex proteins, and they have huge molecules. And that huge molecule, that is already prohibitive to fungal mycelium. But that's only part of the story.
Roland went on to explain that fungal mycelium secretes enzymes that break down proteins like gluten into amino acids. These smaller compounds are then able to be sucked up and utilized by the fungal organism.
We do that, and mushrooms do that as well. The difference is we do it in intestinal systems, and mushrooms do it to the outside. So the mycelium secretes enzymes into their substrate. Definitely they use the gluten, but not by taking up the whole molecule as we would.
That broken down molecule, that would no longer be a risk.
Exactly, because even if you have the disease, you need your amino acids. And even if they came from gluten protein initially, it doesn't matter.
Well, the first part of my question has been answered. Gluten is not getting sucked up directly into the mushrooms. But what I still don't know is whether or not gluten is coming into direct contact with the outside of the mushrooms and cross-contaminating them before they go onto grocery store shelves.
If anything, it would be somewhere on the stipe base. That's where I can see traces of gluten still being there. But it's not because it's in the mushroom, it's just a harvest issue.
So it would come down then to the individual farms.
Exactly.
Okay, I guess I know I have to go check out some mushroom farms. Today is a new day and I get to go tour a mushroom farm. By the way, if you have made it this far, I'd really appreciate if you would subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers right now.
Okay, without any further ado, I'm hitting the road to go check out this mushroom farm.
If I was a mushroom, what mushroom would I be? That is a unique question, I'm not gonna lie.
This is Brett Keith. Brett runs a mushroom farm located just outside of Edmonton, Alberta. And he was kind enough to invite me to witness a harvest and talk a little bit about gluten.
Whenever I get a new strain of mushroom or a new isolation, I like to kind of toss it to the wind, as some people will say, and I actually, usually about 6 to 12 different types of substrates, and I kind of play with the mushrooms to see what they like. Every mushroom's a little bit different, and I love to kind of find out what they prefer instead of us forcing them to do what they want. When it comes to substrates and your grain spawn, I've tried just about every type of grain. So I've done millet, I've done birdseed, I've done popcorn, whole wheat, corn in general. I now do just whole wheat and I actually use about 20% oats in it as well. Going from expansion to expansion, it doesn't stall out as easy and other things. When you're growing the amount that we are, it helps.
So I found out that Brett uses gluten in his agar and grain spawn. The big question now is, since there's gluten inside of the mushroom substrates, how much substrate are these mushrooms going to pick up in the harvest process?
So your general cluster with your small little fragments, not terrible. There's still going to be some on that one. Nearly almost nothing on that one.
If you were to trim that away, do you think it would be growing up the stem at all?
Oh, well, let's...
You can see that there are some substrate spots where it's growing into the stem, but they're few and far between, and this could be entirely mitigated with the right harvesting technique. But what about another species like lion's mane, another very common edible mushroom? I can see a couple spots where the substrate's growing in, but it looks quite clean. Or at least that is the case until... This lion's mane harvest picked up so much of the substrate, and this is because it's the third time that this block has produced mushrooms.
Once the bag or the block starts to really dry out, this really, it takes chunks with it. That's usually going to be the final flush before it just goes out into the compost or something like that. So
you can literally see the wheat grain on this substrate.
If your tool touches any part of the gluten substrate during the harvest process and isn't properly cleaned afterwards, everything you touch afterwards is at risk of cross-contamination with gluten, even if you're purely just touching clean, fresh mushrooms and cutting off the bottom part. If your tool touched the substrate, then there's a risk. It seems that it is possible to entirely take away the risk of cross-contamination during harvesting, but something tells me that most farms aren't going to do this. They would have to give up on several pounds of the fresh mushrooms that they're harvesting to avoid risking cutting into any substrate. Typically, mushroom farms will dry and powder the ugly parts of the mushrooms closest to the substrate to avoid having them go to waste. It is incredibly likely that trace amounts of gluten are getting into these mixes if there's any gluten present in the substrate. But to confirm that would require a proper gluten laboratory test, which I don't have the budget for. If there is enough interest in this topic, I will find a way to get that test. Okay, but what about button mushrooms, like the regular grocery store mushrooms? That's what I baited you into watching this video with, and all I've talked about are specialty gourmet mushrooms. I started doing some research and found a few different papers that detail button mushroom substrates to be used commercially. From these, I found that most growers use a blend of wheat straw, gypsum, and horse manure. This is kind of industry standard, and then growers freestyle their own ingredients in there. Now, wheat straw, contrary to what you might think, actually doesn't contain any gluten. It's just the stalk leading up to the actual wheat grain which contains the gluten. However, there is no good way to prevent cross-contamination of these stalks when harvesting. Thus, there is a risk that wheat straw as a primary ingredient in the button mushroom substrate could introduce gluten into the substrate. So, just like with other gourmet mushrooms, there is a risk of cross-contamination, and it comes down to the individual farms that are growing these mushrooms and their recipes as well as harvesting practices. Every video that I've seen of harvesting in a commercial button mushroom farm shows the workers going very quickly and not very carefully to prevent picking up substrate. I frequently find substrate still attached to grocery store mushrooms, and if there is a trace amount of gluten present in the substrate, well, it could explain why I've been feeling sick sometimes after eating them. So, based on what I have learned, are mushrooms actually gluten-free? Well, I think I have my answer. Your average grocery store mushroom is probably not gluten-free completely. I think mushrooms fit better into the gluten-friendly category, like what restaurants say when something doesn't have gluten, but they can't guarantee there wasn't cross-contamination and they don't want to get sued. At the very least, I'd say that the risk for me personally is too high to justify continuing to buy grocery store mushrooms. For anyone with just a gluten intolerance, I'd expect that you'd have no issues at all with mushrooms. But if you're celiac, I'm not suggesting you stop buying and eating mushrooms. Mushrooms are fantastic for you and they should be part of your diet. I'm suggesting that you ask additional questions at your local farmer's market or to your biggest mushroom supplier to check in on their harvesting practices and their recipes. I'd expect that most farms don't even know this is a concern and would be super willing to try to limit cross-contamination where possible. This is, of course, all just my opinion based on what I saw, and I would need a proper gluten laboratory test to confirm it. If there is enough interest in this topic, I will find a way to get that test. Big thank you to Roland and Brett for helping out with this video. If you want to take a look at K-Dun Hobbyist, which is Brett's mushroom company, it'll be linked in the description. Also, I'd really appreciate if you would subscribe to my channel and maybe watch another video. You can run, but you can't hide.